Part 1. The Wolf Who Learned to Love. Chapter 1. The Man the World Feared. The world knew him as a monster, not because of the rumors, not because of the stories whispered in dark rooms, but because every person who had ever challenged him eventually learned the same lesson. Never make the mistake of believing Dmitri Volkov was a man you could defeat. In the underground world of America, his name carried the same weight as a warning. The Wolf. The Russian who built an empire from nothing. The man who took control of the largest mafia organization in the country before the age of 35. His enemies said he had no heart. His allies said he had no fear. Both were wrong, because there was one person who knew the truth. One person who knew that behind the cold eyes, the expensive suits, and the reputation of violence, there was a man who was capable of loving someone more than he loved his own life. His name was Adrian Volkov. And before the world tried to take Adrian away from him, Dmitri Volkov was simply a man who had finally found peace 10 years earlier. Russia, a country where power was inherited through blood and weakness was punished without mercy. Dmitri Volkov was born into a mafia family, but he was never given anything. His father believed fear was the only language a leader needed. A mafia king does not love, his father would say. Love creates enemies. Love creates weaknesses. Dmitri remembered those words his entire life. Not because he agreed with them, but because he spent years proving them wrong. At 22 years old, Dmitri watched his own family turn against him. The older mafia leaders believed he was too young, too emotional, too different. And the biggest insult they used against him was not his age. It was the person he loved. A man, someone they believed made him unworthy of ruling. They laughed when Dmitri stood before them and demanded respect. They called him a disgrace. They told him he would never become the head of the Volkov Empire. That night, Dmitri made a promise, not to become cruel, not to become heartless, but to become powerful enough that no one would ever have the authority to tell him who he could love. The night the wolf was born, the old world leaders underestimated him. They thought Dmitri was only a young man with anger. They did not understand that anger combined with patience was far more dangerous. Over the next few years, Dmitri dismantled every person who stood against him, not through reckless violence, through intelligence, through strategy, through knowing exactly where his enemies would fall before they even realized they were standing near a cliff. By 30, he controlled one of the most powerful mafia organizations in America. The same people who once laughed at him now lowered their heads when he entered a room. The same men who called his love a weakness now feared the man who protected it. But there was still one thing missing. Until he met Adrian in Chapter 2, the man who tamed the wolf, people believed monsters were born without hearts. They believed men like Dmitri Volkov were created from darkness, shaped by violence, betrayal, and ambition until nothing human remained. But they were wrong, because even the coldest winter can be touched by sunlight. And for Dmitri Volkov, that sunlight had a name. Adrian. 5 years before the world knew Dmitri as the most powerful mafia lord in America, he was a man surrounded by enemies. Every person around him wanted something. His money, his power, his influence. The people who smiled at him were usually the same people planning how to betray him. Dmitri had learned a simple rule. Trust was a luxury powerful men could not afford. That rule protected him. It kept him alive. Until one night changed everything. The rain poured heavily over the streets of New York. Dmitri had just finished a meeting with several of his closest allies. The meeting had been tense. Another family had challenged his authority, and some of his own men were beginning to question his decisions. They saw kindness as weakness. They saw patience as hesitation. They wanted the old ways: fear, blood, cruelty. Dmitri stepped outside the restaurant, his expression cold. His bodyguards followed behind him. "Another family thinks they can challenge us?" one of his men asked. Dmitri adjusted his coat. "They can treat them." "And what will you do?" Dmitri looked toward the city lights. "Remind them why they should have stayed quiet." To everyone around him, he was still the wolf, untouchable, unbreakable. But then he heard something, a voice, a stranger arguing with another man in the alley nearby. Normally, Dmitri would have ignored it. Normally, he would have walked away, but something made him stop. "Please, I don't want any trouble." The voice was calm, not afraid. Dmitri looked into the alley and saw a young man standing there. He was dressed simply, nothing like the wealthy people Dmitri usually dealt with. He had no guards, no weapons, no power. Yet he stood in front of three dangerous men trying to intimidate him. One of them grabbed his arm. "You think you can just walk away?" The young man pulled back. "I said I would pay you back. I just need more time." The man laughed. "People like you don't get more time." Before anything else happened, Dmitri spoke. "Let him go." The entire alley went silent. The men turned around, and immediately their confidence disappeared. Everyone in the city knew that voice. Everyone knew that presence. Dmitri Volkov, the wolf, the man who made criminals disappear. The three men quickly released the stranger. "We didn't know." Dmitri looked at them. "You didn't need to." That was enough. They left. The young man looked at Dmitri carefully, not with fear. That surprised him. Everyone looked at Dmitri with fear, but this man looked at him like he was trying to understand him. "Thank you," the stranger said. Dmitri said nothing. He turned to leave. Then the stranger spoke again. "Wait." Dmitri stopped. "You helped me. I should at least know your name." His bodyguards immediately became tense. Nobody asked Dmitri Volkov questions. Nobody demanded anything from him, but Dmitri turned around. "Dmitri," the young man smiled slightly. "I'm Adrian." A simple name, a simple introduction. Yet Dmitri would remember that moment for the rest of his life. Days passed, then weeks, and somehow Adrian kept appearing in Dmitri's life. Not because he was chasing power, not because he wanted to taunt anything. That was what confused Dmitri the most. Everyone wanted something from him. Adrian wanted nothing. When Dmitri offered him money for helping him that night, Adrian refused. When Dmitri offered him protection, Adrian refused. When Dmitri asked why he was not afraid of him, Adrian simply answered, "Because I don't think you are the man everyone says you are." For the first time in years, Dmitri had no response. Adrian saw something nobody else saw. He saw the man behind the reputation, the man who secretly visited orphanages, the man who protected his employees' families, the man who carried the weight of an empire but still remembered small details about the people around him. "You pretend you don't care," Adrian told him one evening. They were sitting in a quiet restaurant far away from Dmitri's usual world. "But you care more than anyone I've ever met." Dmitri looked at him. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" "Because one day someone will use that against you." Adrian smiled sadly. "Maybe. But if the whole world only sees the monster, someone should remember the man." Those words stayed with Dmitri, because nobody had ever tried to save him. Not from enemies, not from death. From himself. For the first time, Dmitri Volkov wondered what life would be like without war, without constant suspicion, without always preparing for betrayal. For the first time, the wolf wanted something other than victory. He wanted Adrian. But loving Adrian meant entering the most dangerous battle of his life. Because the mafia world could accept a ruthless leader. It could accept a feared king. But could it accept a king who loved another man? Dmitri was about to find out. Chapter 3. A love worth fighting for. The mafia world had rules. Rules written in blood. A leader could be ruthless. A leader could be feared. A leader could betray anyone and still keep his crown. But there was one thing the old mafia families believed a leader could never have. A heart. Because a heart could be broken. And a broken heart could destroy an empire. For months, Dmitri tried to convince himself that Adrian was only a temporary distraction, a peaceful moment in a life filled with violence, a reminder that there was still something good left in him. But the more he tried to stay away, the more he found himself searching for Adrian. He noticed the smallest things, the way Adrian smiled when he was nervous, the way he always helped strangers even when he had problems of his own, the way he looked at Dmitri without seeing the dangerous reputation everyone else feared. Adrian didn't see the wolf. He saw Dmitri, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. One evening, Dmitri brought Adrian to his private estate outside the city. It was a place very few people had ever seen, a massive mansion surrounded by security, hidden away from the world. Adrian looked around in surprise. "You live here?" Dmitri nodded. "You don't like it?" "It's beautiful." Dmitri looked away. "But," Adrian smiled, but it feels lonely. Those words hit harder than Dmitri expected, because Adrian was right. The mansion had everything: luxury, protection, power, everything except warmth. Dmitri had spent years building a fortress, but he had forgotten that a fortress was still a prison if nobody inside loved you. That night, Adrian walked through the halls and noticed something unusual: a room filled with books. Not weapons, not business documents, books. Dmitri noticed him looking. "My mother used to read to me when I was young." Adrian turned. "You never told me about your mother." Dmitri became quiet. There were parts of his past he rarely spoke about. "My father believed emotions made people weak. My mother believed emotions were what made people human." "And who did you believe?" Dmitri looked at him. "I stopped believing in anything." Adrian's expression softened. "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you." But not everyone was happy about Dmitri changing. Inside the Volkov organization, whispers began. The old members noticed their leader was different. He was still dangerous, still powerful, but he was no longer interested in destroying people unnecessarily. Some saw it as growth, others saw it as weakness, especially Mikhail Orlov, Dmitri's most loyal commander. Mikhail had fought beside Dmitri during his rise to power. He respected Dmitri more than anyone. But even he was concerned. "You are changing." Dmitri looked at him. "Is that a problem?" "No." Mikhail paused. "But the world will try to punish you for it." Dmitri understood. The world had always been cruel to anything it couldn't understand. The biggest challenge came from the Mafia Council. The oldest and most powerful families gathered in a private meeting. They had tolerated Dmitri's success. They had tolerated his independence. But they would not tolerate Adrian. A man named Konstantin Volkov, one of Dmitri's relatives and a former supporter, stood before the others. "He has forgotten what he is." Another man asked, Because he loves someone?" Konstantin shook his head. "Because he has allowed someone to become important enough that enemies can use him." The room became silent. They all knew the truth. Adrian was the first person Dmitri Volkov had ever loved, and that made him dangerous. Not to Dmitri, to everyone who wanted control over him. When Dmitri learned about the meeting, he didn't react with anger. He reacted with certainty. He walked into the council room alone. Every conversation stopped. The same people who once looked down on him now avoided his eyes. Dmitri placed a document on the table. "What is this?" someone asked. "The new agreement." They looked through it. Dmitri was giving Adrian legal protection, financial security, and recognition inside his empire. A man who was not born into the mafia. A man they considered an outsider. "You are making him a target." Dmitri stared at them. "No." He stepped forward. "I am making it clear that anyone who targets him targets me." The room went silent. One of the elders laughed. "You would risk your empire for him?" Dmitri's expression didn't change. "I built this empire because I wanted the freedom to live my life." He looked around the room. "If I cannot even choose who I love, then what exactly did I win?" That night, Adrian found Dmitri sitting alone. "You fought with them because of me." Dmitri looked at him. "Yes. You could lose everything." Dmitri was silent for a moment. Then he reached for Adrian's hand. "I spent my entire life fighting to become powerful." He looked into Adrian's eyes. "But you are the first thing I have ever had that made all that fighting worth it." Adrian's eyes filled with emotion. "Dmitri, I don't need the world to accept us." A small smile appeared on Dmitri's face. "I only need you." For the first time in his life, Dmitri Volkov chose something without thinking about power. He chose love. But somewhere across the ocean, someone was watching. Someone who saw Adrian not as a person, but as a weakness. In London, a man named Victor Blackwood looked at a photograph of Dmitri and Adrian, and he smiled. "The wolf has finally found something he cannot live without." He placed the photograph down. "Now we know how to kill him." Chapter 4. The king's greatest treasure power had always been Dmitri Volkov's language. From a young age, he learned that respect was not given. It was taken. He learned how to negotiate with enemies who wanted his downfall. He learned how to walk into a room full of people who hated him and leave with their loyalty. He learned how to survive. But Adrian taught him something no battlefield ever could. He taught him how to live. 3 years after their first meeting, the world had changed. Dmitri was still feared. His empire had grown larger than ever. His name was spoken carefully by criminals, businessmen, and even politicians. But inside the walls of his home, he was no longer just the wolf. He was Adrian's husband, and that was the only title he cared about. Adrian had become a strange but respected presence inside Dmitri's world. At first, the mafia soldiers did not know what to think of him. They expected someone arrogant, someone who wanted power, someone who would use Dmitri's love to control him. Instead, they found a man who remembered their names, a man who asked about their families, a man who treated guards and servants with the same kindness he showed powerful people. One evening, Mikhail Orlov watched Adrian speak with one of the younger guards. The young soldier looked nervous. "I made a mistake with the security report," he admitted. Most people expected punishment. Instead, Adrian calmly said, "Then learn from it. A mistake does not define you. What you do afterward does." Mikhail watched quietly. Later, he approached Dmitri. "I understand now." Dmitri looked at him. "Understand what?" "Why you chose him." For the first time, Mikhail smiled. "He doesn't make you weaker." Dmitri raised an eyebrow. "He reminds you why you became strong." But happiness was something Dmitri had never been allowed to keep easily. Every victory in his life came with a price. And while he was building a peaceful future with Adrian, another empire was watching. Across the ocean, in London. The Blackwood family had controlled London's underground world for decades. Their influence reached across businesses, politics, and criminal organizations. At the center of it all was Victor Blackwood, a man known for his patience. Unlike other mafia leaders, Victor did not rush. He waited. He studied. He allowed his enemies to reveal their weaknesses before he attacked. And for years, he had studied Dmitri Volkov, the American wolf. Victor looked through photographs, reports, and documents. Everything about Dmitri was predictable. His ambition, his intelligence, his hunger for power. Except for one thing. Adrian. Victor stared at a picture of the couple together. "He changed because of him." His advisor nodded. Before Adrian, Dmitri was more aggressive, less controlled. Victor leaned back. "Then Adrian is not just his husband." He smiled slightly. "He is the reason Dmitri Volkov still has a heart." The announcement came a few weeks later. Dmitri was expanding into London. A new chain of businesses, new alliances, new territory. The message was clear. The wolf was coming. The London mafia families gathered immediately. Some were afraid, some were angry. But all agreed on one thing: they could not allow Dmitri to enter their world. One of the leaders slammed his hand on the table. "We attack him before he arrives." Victor shook his head. "No," and the room became quiet. "You do not kill a wolf by attacking its teeth." He looked at Dmitri's photograph. "You remove what gives it a reason to fight." Everyone understood. The target was not Dmitri. It was Adrian. Meanwhile, Dmitri and Adrian were unaware of the storm approaching. They were preparing for a future they believed would last forever. One night, they stood on the balcony of their home, watching the city lights. Adrian rested his head against Dmitri's shoulder. "Do you ever regret choosing me?" Dmitri looked surprised. "Why would you ask that?" "Because your life was simpler before me." Dmitri was quiet. Then he turned toward Adrian. "My life was empty before you." Adrian looked at him. Dmitri continued. "People feared me. They respected me. They obeyed me." He held Adrian's hand. "But nobody knew me." A soft smile appeared on his face. "Until you." Adrian smiled. "Promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that no matter what happens, you won't let the darkness take you completely." Dmitri looked at him. It was a strange request, because Adrian knew something nobody else did. Dmitri was always one tragedy away from becoming the monster everyone believed he was. Dmitri kissed his forehead. "I promise." Neither of them knew that soon the world would test that promise. A few days later, Adrian received an invitation to attend a charity event overseas. Dmitri immediately noticed something unusual. "You don't have to go." Adrian smiled. "It's just a few days." Dmitri looked at him carefully. I don't like it. Adrian teased him. You don't like anything that keeps me away from you. For a moment, Dmitri almost smiled. Almost, because something inside him felt wrong. A feeling he had learned to trust. A feeling that had kept him alive. But Adrian touched his face gently. I'll be back soon. Dmitri looked into his eyes. Promise it, Adrian smiled. I promise. Far away in London, Victor Blackwood received confirmation. The flight is arranged. He looked out over the city. Once Adrian Volkov is gone, the wolf will finally be vulnerable. But Victor had forgotten one important thing. Dmitri Volkov had survived betrayal, war, and enemies far stronger than him. He had never been dangerous because he had nothing to lose. He was dangerous because he finally had something worth protecting.